G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. It's the middle of the week, you can almost see the weekend on the horizon. Now today of course we have a lot to talk about. We need to look at that dam that has been destroyed. Now what I've done is not just speculating this, I've reached out to two experts, both of which have served in special operations elements around the world. One as an expert in one area and one as an expert in combat engineering, specifically in demolitions and specifically also in chemical weapons as well. But we're focusing on that demolition today. And I've asked the question, does it look like a strike or a controlled dem? We're going to talk about US elections, UK further funding, and what the Finnish leader has said. Also, we need to look at where a new axis may be evolving for Russia to attack on. We need to have a look at Kursk. We need to look at what is happening up there. Russia is launching large attacks. They're taking large losses for what's looking like very small gains at the moment. But let's talk about Kursk as a whole and what happens if Ukraine were to withdraw out of there or Russia have success and what weapons we are seeing used. Of course, we're going to look at maps and we'll look at footage that I see to as strategically important. Either it's giving a geolocation of what troops are in what area or a weapon system that is entering the battlefield or being used in a different way. That's why some footage I don't show, because I see what I deem as strategically important. And at the end of the day, this is attritional protracted war. Having large losses is all part of it. So we will see. But today is a massive day for me. Of course, this afternoon, I will be seeing my oncologist and I'm expecting some more results back for my brain tumour. And that will give me a better idea as if we're going down the path of radiotherapy on my brain as well, which I do hope I don't have to do, but we will see because one part of the tumour is looking worse. An oncologist, for those who don't know, is basically a cancer chemotherapy specialist, and we will get a better idea of when chemo will start. Look, to be honest, it's probably going to be next Monday for 12 months, but we'll see. And thank you all of those who give me well wishes on that journey. So we will see. I'll see how I can make videos and report during the chemo as well. I don't know how that's going to work, but thank you for all the support, everyone, from lovely messages to financial, everything. Now, one thing I wanted to speak on, because I saw a very interesting poll. And the poll read, I can't find it anymore, but it said, should drone operators be given the same protections as regular soldiers? Meaning, as far as humanitarian increased suffering protections under different conventions. Should they be given that of someone in the trenches? And I think the answer is, of course, yes. Absolutely, they should be offered those same protections, regardless of whether you're a tanky, a grunt, a pilot, a drone operator should be awarded, well, not awarded, you should have those protections regardless of the uniform you wear. But what I say in this is, yes, but those drone operators specifically need to be held to the same standards of those protections also. The amount of executions and chemical weapon drops I see from drones far exceeds that of guys throwing them or having fingers on triggers. So that protection is, of course, should be awarded regardless of what you're doing, but also you need to hold to that standard and be held to that standard by your allies also. And the problem is, because this isn't occurring, this leads to the conclusion around where some people see that there is a difference in the handling of captured then drone operators. And we do see this, and we do see this come through groups, that people go, there's far less sympathy for those operators, on the drone operators, than for captured soldiers, and more inhumane actions towards them, because the standard there of what the drones are doing and filming and published online is different also. So what I'm saying is, I believe everyone, regardless of whatever, should be awarded or just automatically those protections, but also need to be held to that standard also by internally and externally, whether that are Russia's allies on Russia or Ukraine and Ukraine's allies on Ukraine, holding them to account. Sadly, I don't have high hopes for this. But let's talk about this dam. And we did speak quickly about this yesterday. So here is Ukraine in, let me zoom out, sorry. Here is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. Of course, we can see the red areas, which have been occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. And this is in one of the hottest spots that we have been speaking about, which is around Kursk. Now, this dam sits in here, starting to near. Now, this has been damaged before, so there is less water in this, apparently. But I wanted to show you the footage and talk about what I see in this, and what I see is who benefits the most from this, because that will give us an idea of who blew this up. Because, of course, Russian pages have pointed fingers at Ukraine. Ukrainian pages have pointed fingers at Russia. So let me show you the footage first. And there's a few things we need to break down in this. You can see a tarp flapping here. This is the dam itself, but you can see some soldiers as well in this footage down to the bottom left. So you see the major explosion here. So that is then the explosion. Now in this, you cannot see, so you can see the soldier lift his head up, he's just here. Now, in this, you cannot see frame by frame anything, any munition coming in, nor does it seem like there is a momentum of assault behind this. And then you can see these soldiers start moving in here. So there's a few things to break down in this. So what I did was I asked a professional in this sector on military demolitions, combat engineer. Looks pretty consistent for a demolition, to be honest, mostly because I don't see any ordnance arriving. And even with the hypersonics, will show up in frame by frame like that and has broken this down. Let's go further. He said, I will caveat by saying that I've been known to be wrong about these things, but for an explosion, for all the explosion videos I've watched recently, you can be very consistently see the ordnance just before impact. So you see it coming in. I'll give a few examples in a minute. I said, is there anything about the explosion itself that seems more like a demolition than a strike? Not particularly. It is a sizable blast for sure, but the flame and blast that appears to blow out toward the left looks like something underground, making its way out through the paths of least resistance. Of course, everything follows path of least resistance, the water that will flow out of here, and the explosion that caused this. So he sent a number of these glide bomb videos, but of course you can see these glides coming in. Glide bombs move relatively very slow. He says the wing kits are pretty noticeable. It could have been a penetration item dropped slick, which would be moving much faster. Unlikely to be artillery because not enough high explosive to get through that and make the explosion. Unless the artillery hit has stored ammunition. Unless there's stored ammo there, the arty hit has penetrated and exploded that ammo. And what he has said to show, that this would show up on a video, he said this is a Mark 48, 2,000 pounder dropped by the US and is slick, so no wings on it. And the first thing you can see in this footage is, of course, frame by frame. So you can see, in these first frames, you can see it coming in, and from other angles, it is very noticeable of these coming in, even slick, you will see it. Now, I gave him the after video, which is then this video here. So this is the aftermath of where we see these explosions and the drone filming it. Excuse me. He said, I'd go for demolition. The fireball and blast matches. So he's saying, yep, from that, most likely demolition. I asked another guy who's very experienced in this, and he says, hard to say, but not seeing anything strike. Whoever was filming seemingly knew when it was going to occur just based on the zooming in. So that in that direction, we're looking there for a reason. I'll be trying to ascertain where did the footage originate. It's impossible to know the actual origins, but many are saying it was filmed by a Ukrainian drone. And who does the strike benefit? There's arguments either ways. Therefore, you can tell he's a soldier here. It's a mystery wrapped in foreskin dipped in dope shit. But who does the strike benefit more? Okay, I will say the strike benefits Ukraine more. Why would Russia at this point hit this? Right, this has been within Russia's targeting range for weeks or months at this point in time. And the way I think you need to look at this is with like Occam's razor. It's like, what is the most likely? Who is most benefit from this? We have had a large amount of ground being made by Russian forces on the flanks here, as well as people saying the biggest threat, and this is from Ukrainian pages, is that Russia is trying to push down this way to get fire control north to south on Kursk and flank around Kursk and cut off, this is, I believe, the N15 road here, and cut that off. This is what that does. Also, what we are hearing from many pages is that there is withdrawal out of Kursk. Now, retreating forces, when there are slow advances, they destroy tactically significant crossings to slow the enemy down, and this denies Russia entry points. So I think it is most likely going to benefit the Ukrainian withdrawal or pullback out of here, or it's at least slow down a Russian advancement. And I think, therefore, if we had a pros and cons list, it does seem to benefit Ukraine more. But you may ask, well, is Ukraine going to be caught in here and cross off this road? Now, we don't know how much this has actually raised the water. We'll look over something in a sec, but I've looked at the topographical map in here, and you can see this is where the explosion occurred and that cut, and where the water would flow out, as well as where those roads are running. So that is a potential also, but it could also flow back down in the direction of where the Russians are making ground on the southern flank here. Also, I'm not exactly sure of the flow rate, and you can't go meter by meter on this map at least, of where that may go if there's a large amount of water flow through there. Some are saying it's not that much because of the damage that had occurred previously. This is actually from a Russian FPV drone, and you can see this is the first footage I've seen of where that is flowing out of there also. But you can see the footage of like a drone like this sitting there knowing where to look versus that FPV drone behind the lines. So another thing I wanted to do was look on Google Earth. So this is Kursk Cove, and it gives you just a better idea of this is the dam right here, and you can see where these lower points are and the flow through. The flow through and where this N15 road sits. So depending on how much, that N15 may not be cut off. As you can see, if this sticks to, if it's not a mass overflow, it may flow down through and still have the ability for that road to not be cut off. Hence why I do doubt if it was the Russians that hit this. It does seem to benefit Ukraine more than Russia in here. Let's look at what Surik has said. Recent video footage shows the perpetrators of the dam bursting near Stady. Of course, we showed you that footage with those two guys. This indicates that the Ukrainian situation in Kursk Cove is very difficult and will accelerate the withdrawal process in the short term. Meanwhile, Russian forces have taken control of the first line of defense in the eastern and already control 15% of the important Ukrainian stronghold of the southwest of Donetsk Oblast. I'll show you the maps in Kursk Cove in a sec. But Kyiv Independent has said differently. They've said Russian forces damaged the dam holding Kursk Cove Reservoir in Donetsk Oblast on November the 11th from the governor in this area. He says this attack potentially threatens residents of settlements of the Volga River. Any dam like this will, but also I believe it will slow down, or Russia won't be able to, because see where it's flowing on the northern side. This was the biggest threat here, was that Russia through Sonetivskaya as well out through here have a flank through here. This in some way may even protect this road here if it's all flooded through here, depending on how much water is actually in that reservoir. Let's look over the rest of this article. It's not the first time a critical dam had been hit during the full-scale war. Allegedly, Russia destroyed the occupied Kharkovka Dam in Kherson Oblast in June 23. This is at the very start of Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive. That's why many have doubted that. Also, unleashing a massive flood and environmental and humanitarian disaster across southern Ukraine. According to the governor, the water level in the river within Velika Novosilivka rose by 1.2 meters. No homes have been flooded. So, by saying that no homes have been flooded, well, it doesn't look like this road then, because if these homes haven't been flooded in Dashny here, it may be sticking into this area if it's risen by only 1.2 meters. Therefore, it's cut off potentially Russia's flank maneuver around here. They blame Russian pro-war Telegram channels blame Ukraine for destroying the dam. The dam. The Ukrainian military has not commented on these claims. I do think most likely this was a Ukrainian demolition, given the evidence that I have laid out here, and I've asked for people's opinions on this, and I believe most people actually agree with that idea of that's what it was. So let's talk about actually the map movements around Kursk Cove. Now, Dalny here, we do see that there is a Russian advance, as well as in Ilyaninkia, as well as a small just to the east of Voznesenkia. So we see on multiple different fronts there are changes on this map in different areas today. So let's have a look at some areas around here, and there's some interesting bits about where there may be large movements. So Dalny, of course, right down in here, we have this red geolocation right here. Now, what this is a large Russian armored column attack from a Ukrainian drone perspective here. Now, what I want to show you in here is, one, how many vehicles are being involved in these attacks. I will talk about the increase, at least in reported Russian losses. We can see, I believe this hit some anti-personnel mines. That's what I think that vehicle probably hit. And then we can see then strikes of artillery or something along on these vehicles as well. But one of the things I want to show you is you can see where these vehicles are coming down along then where defensive lines are and running then adjacent to some, but also parallel to others in Dalny. Just keep that in mind when I show you the fortifications in here. This is a Leopard 2A4 that is firing then HE onto some Russian vehicles in here as well. So Leopard 2 working in Dalny as there is further assaults along this area. But what I want to look at is on then the map. So we have then where we see Dalny in here and running, of course, parallel to some of these fortifications, which some have been taken over, as well as adjacent to others, as Russia does break through the first lines of defense in this area. Of course, this is where the flanker maneuver, we believe, with the dam may have been cut off if Ukraine has demolished that dam in this direction. Now, what a Ukrainian page said about this is they've repelled the assault. The brigade repelled a massive assault, another unsuccessful attempt by the occupiers to advance. The fighters met the enemy with a rain of shells, artillery, large bombers and skids in the village dozens of meters away from the enemy tank, a crew of the Leopard 2A4. The Russians have 29 people killed, 19 injured, destroyed 2 tanks, 6 armoured vehicles as well. With any numbers, I just say take anything with a grain of salt. But I also say we see a lot of losses in these attacks, but that continual grind forward, that is also still part of attritional war. No one is going to move anywhere currently without massive losses, especially into these areas that have large defensive works. Noel reports has shown where this has been destroyed, that dam, but he also shows this advancement confirming just into Kursk, Ilinivkia sort of area in this direction as well. Let's bring this up again. So further out in this, he's saying that's where there is a Russian advancement. Let's then have a look on Syriac map. This gives us a good idea. So this is where this Leopard was working, and those other Russian armored vehicles running adjacent to and parallel to some of these defensive lines. These ones in here give a better idea of just the major ones. Russian army took full control of the first defensive lines, Kursk from the east. In addition, new Russian advances were made inside the town, where Russian forces captured the Rozha railway station. So right in here, right about sort of where Noel reports are showing us, but where Russia has gained these 2 lines of defense that, of course, defend against an east to west attack, but has really been flanked on here, and these defensive lines in Dalny here may be getting flanked as well. But the pincer around Stary Turny from taking out that dam, so I believe it was most likely Ukraine dam, may have stopped the second area of that pincer. Now, I just want to move further down into Antonivkia here. We do have a Syriac update, and he's showing a lot of this area through Antonivkia is getting filled in as well further to the south of Ilinivka. So see where Ilinka is, see where Ilinka is, and see where his map is showing more Russian army made significant advances west of Pobia, northwest of Konstantinivka and north of Antonivkia. In addition, Russian forces made new advances east of Boronivka. So in this whole area in here that he's saying is getting filled in. Now, I want to just move out of this area. We'll come back down into here, and where I want to jump, as I can't speak, actually, let's just talk. So we see some from Tushkane, we see Seledov, some areas being made as well, of course, on the flank of Pokrovsk, very large scale. I'll just show you this quickly. Russian army made small advances here and entered here. Clashes with Ukrainian army are taking place, so Ukraine is trying to push that back. But where I want to move is of course, up into Kursk. Now, I believe this map doesn't show any territorial changes up in Kursk, but this is some things I want to talk about and show you a couple of things too. So we can see that there has been major battalion size or battalion plus size Russian armoured attacks into here. Many of these looking like they take significant losses, and reports that they are being repelled, although there are other reports saying that there were losses but also made ground. But it does seem that both Russia and Ukraine are putting highly trained weapons and highly technologically advanced systems into this area to try and take back or to hold, in Ukraine's case in here too, that it hasn't been left to just anyone, because we see things that confirm this, like Russia is using some of their more high-end technology, like the fiber optically controlled drones. So obviously very passionate about holding or taking back ground in here. But also we see what this drone is striking is an Abrams tank, one of Ukraine's better tanks, of course, with very few numbers of it. As far as the damage to that, I have absolutely no idea how much damage that would or would not have caused. It's almost impossible to tell. You don't know what the drone was carrying. You don't know exactly where on the tank it's been hit on that turret. But what I'm trying to bring out is both Russia and Ukraine are showing really serious intentions of fighting back, in Russia's case, to try and take back area in here, or Ukraine holding area in here. And I'll lay out some of those reasons. But what we hear is Russia is taking significant losses. And we see this in the footage too. We can see that a Russian tank here in a swamp, but you can see what I'm interested in is the electronic warfare system on the cope cage up here. I'll talk about EW in a sec. So obviously Russia is willing to pour in large amounts to try and take this back. So it is important. I believe they'll be trying to get that back if they can before. Well, there's two reasons I believe Russia's having attacks in here. One is to try and hold the Ukrainian forces in here so they're not moved to another area on the front line to stabilise. But secondly, potentially before Trump gets into office, so Ukraine has less cards on the table if there is a negotiation. But what you can see is attacks like this that show battalion-sized movements and large losses of Russian vehicles in here and targeting. But again, the increased losses is something we would expect as there is more fighting. And I saw this interesting chain here. We thought yesterday's record Russian troops losses was something. So Ukraine is reporting day on day that Russia is having record losses. In this case, almost 2,000 killed in action, what would mean a further real rule of thumb. Let's go another 4,000 wounded. Now, what I will say is Russia has taken large losses, potentially in the tens or hundreds, but I do doubt whether it's like 2,000. The losses are large, but 2,000 would be absolutely, like the footage wouldn't be, 2, 3, 4 failed assaults. This would be multiple failed assaults. The platoons are around 30 members. So yeah, there's about a few failed, but I do doubt any of these numbers, whether it's Russian released, Ukrainian released, UK released, any numbers in this war. Firstly, I say, how do you know how many people were killed if a HIMARS hits a bunker or an Iskander hits a bunker? How do you know? How do you get to this figure? And also we can see that as Russia is moving on the front line, that it does have an informational benefit to go, yes, but they're taking that many losses in doing this that they will collapse. But this is something we've been hearing again and again, but it's impossible to prove or disprove. But as Russia has increased attacks in attritional war, the KIA, wounded in action and missing in action will, of course, increase. And Russia is pushing on many different front lines at the moment. But there's a few things. There obviously is the morale to do this and the ability to launch armoured vehicles into here. The question should be more of not who is taking more losses, but who can sustain these losses. Because if Russia's launching these attacks and they're having more losses, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but also the other side is getting attacked more, and you are going to have increased losses and use of weapon systems too. Therefore, your logistics is going to be more strained. And then Rene Duba here says, warring parties tend to step up effort when they think they're near to, 1, a major breakthrough, 2, exhaustion on both sides stalemate negotiations, 3, they're near exhaustion of men and means. Russia is stepping up, so which is it? Now, what I would say in this is these are not mutually exclusive. It can actually be a mixture of all three. Stepping up efforts up here, thinking they're going to have a breakthrough maybe in the southeast to hold those Ukrainian troops there who could maybe potentially stop that breakthrough. There is exhaustion, of course, but you're stepping up efforts and you've got guys willing to do that and able to do those attacks. And there is a idea that both sides are very exhausted. Depending on if you listen to Ukrainian or Russian pages, both sides will say that both sides are completely exhausted. There's nothing left. We know that is untrue, but we do know this war is getting long in the tooth. Their own near exhaustion of men and means, exhaustion of both sides at stalemate negotiations. And as negotiations will come, both sides will want to put themselves in the best possible position going into that. But I believe it's probably a mixture of these, but I believe Russia believes a major breakthrough. And if you just look at the exponential increasing ground in the southeast, it does look like that is occurring. In an attritional protracted war, you're talking 3, 4, 5 kilometers a day. That is a front line in free fall. I'm sorry to tell you, that is it. The Ukrainian 2023 counteroffensive, what everyone was saying is a collapse, free fall, this and that, was 8 to 11 kilometers, depending on the two which areas you want to measure in. And some of these are that in a day or two, Any attritional war is going to take significant losses. The highest Ukrainian losses were probably in the 2023 counteroffensive. And if they go on a 25-26, you're going to have losses there too. It's all about who can sustain that. And in my opinion, it is looking like Russia can sustain, that Russia's taking high losses, but can also sustain those losses more so than Ukraine is sustaining the losses at the moment. Chris Flattery says here, let's flip the dog's war. Historically, wars have always reached their most violent point at the end, more like a grunge match. As Karl von Clausewitz would write, this is where war is driven by anger and little in the way of strategic control. So violence more so than strategic control in Kursk. But I am not convinced this is exactly how this looks in Kursk. And I'll send across this from a friend of mine, I'll say, giving an opinion in here. I agree with you that in principle it would make sense for Ukraine to retreat from Kursk. But suppose they do and transfer troops to the east. And now put yourself in Russia's shoes. What do you do? Do you do the same, but without the interior lines advantage and with a heavier, less mobile force? So Russia has a heavier, more armoured, less mobile force around this area. It's going to take longer, and a larger force is going to take longer to move. Or do you keep that heavier force where it is and use them to push across into Sumy? If you chose the former, you gain nothing and waste time. With the latter, you keep about as many Ukrainian troops fixed in this general area, except that instead of having a chunk of Russia occupied by Ukraine, now Russia would hold territory in Sumy Oblast for the first time since 2022. This would likely provide Ukraine with a measurable logistics advantage due to fighting on its own territory. And this is what I say the other way, that Russia has a measurable logistic advantage fighting in their own territory back in Kursk. But would the political cost be worth it? I think Ukraine may be stuck in a trap of its own making. And this is why I say I believe Russia really wants some ground in here. Ukraine want to hold something in here, but I believe that the loss of ground in here isn't worth the loss of ground down in the southeast, but that Ukraine may not actually be able to pull out of here, as if you listen to the guys that say Russia is putting 50,000 soldiers into here, if Ukraine now chooses, we need to have a withdrawal out of here, is to move down into the east, is Russia going to then move these guys down in the south and east, or are they going to continue and push across into Sumy and create some level in here, which would be an absolute nightmare as well? So Ukraine may be forced, and this is what I've said, I think the trap that was tried to be laid for Russia to redeploy forces could potentially lay a trap for Ukraine to redeploy forces or not be able to withdraw, because Russia may actually continue on that advancement. Like I've said, this Kursk area is either going to be the biggest strategic failure of the war or the biggest strategic win. I believe nowhere in between. We'll see if Russia can take that back. We'll see if they stop at the border or not. And again, you hear about the North Koreans. There is zero fucking evidence that any North Koreans are fighting in here yet. Do I believe they will? I think it's likely, but again, evidence-based. Anyone who is saying that they are fighting here yet is doing so out of emotion and of what people are saying. They are not doing it off any solid evidence at all. Situation on Kursk front. At Kotonevsky district, Russian army recaptured the eastern part in here, around Nilinovo. At Suja district, during the last 48 hours, Russian army made significant advances west of Borky, taking control of a series of positions along Psiel River and recaptured 75% of the locality of Pokrovsk. So let's look at a few of these. So if we zoom in, and you can see where it is suggesting where Russia has made some of these advancements on the western side around Leonidinovo, around this sector in here, but also that he's saying that west of Borky, that they are 75% of Pokrovsk. Remember, we saw right where my cursor is here, that's where those Russians got obliterated on their inflatable boat crossing across here. But we will see what this front line then looks like in here. Russia's pouring a lot of assets in here, but so is Ukraine. Will Ukraine be willing to deploy more assets in here if Russia start to advance or not? That is something we will see, because that could have a further effect down on the south. Now, let's move. This is on, so we can see around Kupiansk, Russia has made on 2 points of axes, as well as he's now confirming to basically show, Deep State showing exactly what Syriac showed of Russian gain out along the Oskil to the north, so that advancement here. Then we come down onto the Terny front, and Syriac is suggesting that Russia made more ground along Terni, almost to where this crossing is, so down where my cursor is there. That is what Syriac is saying. But now I want to move down into the south and we look at what may be coming in the next coming months or weeks. You can see any of these that I have missed. So Rivnapil, we see there is a Russian advancement in here. But the first thing I want to show you is an interesting geolocation and piece of footage. Now, we don't see Ukrainian helicopters operating that much on the front line due to the air defense, drones, everything. So we see that out from where we're looking here, just above where the borders are, so right where my cursor is, about 8.1 kilometers-ish back from the front line, we see there's a Ukrainian Mi-24 helicopter operating, so he's relatively very close to the front line, but this is from a Russian FPV drone. So this is a long way for a drone to be operating at this length. So as we see it get closer and closer to the helicopter in here, we can see that this chopper, like some Russian drones have with the EW on board, so he launches his missiles there, but as he gets closer, you can see the electronic warfare off the helicopter start hitting it, and then the drone cuts out and we presume was lost. So we are seeing, like the Russian drones that are carrying some EW, we have confirmation that Ukrainian Mi-24 choppers also have EW on board, and that then jamming a drone. Again, strategically or tactically significant footage. So let's have a look around this whole area. Makarivka, Novopil, front line. So situation, Velika Novoselivka. So right in here. I'll show you something in a sec. While the operation to recapture Makarivka was taking place, Russian army restarted advances towards the lake and retaking Rivnapil. So this area in here, and approaching the southern outskirts of Novodarivka. So trying to push further up towards Velika Novoselivka. So if we look at where the Russians have made ground, this is Rivnapil by this red dot. So yes, we can confirm by the maps, but also all the way down near Makarivka as well, as a push that is being shown by this, confirming that Russia is pushing harder on this axis, which we haven't seen them push on for some time. But let's have a bit of a zoom out on what may be occurring right around the axis that we've just looked at and how this matches up with the Kursk front line here. The section's front, they'll be able to observe a break in the Ukrainian defense line. So again, does this go into that there's about to be a collapse of the front line? That is why we're seeing an increase of attacks back into the footage, the Twitter conversation that I just showed you. Is the border of Donetsk and Zap. Previously, it was mentioned the capture of Velika Novoselivka would allow the entry of Russian forces into Dnipro Oblast. A reality will be that we witness in 2025. However, the entry in this oblast will have an even deeper meaning. The arrival of the rear of the Ukrainian defensive line, and there will advance towards Dnipro. The Ukrainian command is aware of this danger and is already building perpendicular lines of defense to stop future Russian advance, which, regardless of an offensive in Zap or not, will take place this year. So we're hearing a lot about a push in Zap Oblast, but what they're talking about in here is if Russia is able to get some area of Velika Novoselivka like this, the ability to get in behind fortified lines, but also the closing up, so something like this, and the closing up of here. Now, what I want to show you is what he's talking about with these fortified lines. So, fall of Velika Novoselivka, and where, if this crosses, so if it's something like, maybe I can't draw on this, something like my cursor is here, and across Kursk, the ability to get in behind these defensive lines, and how Ukraine is building lines along further towards Dnipro and Zap itself also, but the ability, potential to get in behind the current defensive works. We've said this as our most dangerous course of action, that these Russian advances get in behind and can have further advances from there, reintroducing some level of maneuver into the battle space. So did I show you Staria? Yep, I showed you all of that. So let's talk about what both sides of the column are saying about further increases in Russian attacks in Zap Oblast, particularly Kyiv, and like we're seeing, making ground around Velika Novoselivka as well, and of course the city of Zaporizhia itself. So let's look at this. This is from Kyiv Independent. Russian deploys assault groups to Zap Oblast. The Russian army is deploying trained assault groups to frontline positions in Zaporizhia Oblast. A day before, Voloshin said that Russian assault in Zap Oblast could begin any day, like we're hearing about any day up in the north. Also, in early October, Russian troops reportedly renewed their attack on Zaporizhia Oblast. Kiev warned of potential Russian push in the southern region. According to Voloshin, Russia is preparing to intensify its offensive towards the town of Kyiv in Zaporizhia Oblast. Kyiv is very important in here as it is the high ground down to the south and out to the north as well. It sits on a hill. When there was fighting right up around here, we used to go sit on this hill and basically see movement of armoured vehicles from there. You can go back through my old videos if you'd like. This move will allow Russian military to gain control of logistics routes from Zaporizhia to eastern Ukraine. So if they were able to push up into here and block off logistic routes that are funding down into Huliopol and further, and of course where those defensive works are sitting. Voloshin said in October, Russian forces were massing for a breakthrough in the direction of Kyiv. The area was the main axis of Ukraine's southern counteroffensive in 2023, which led to the liberation of the settlement of Robotny, but achieved no major results. Interesting to see how Kyiv Independent is now talking about this offensive compared to at the time. Russian troops have intensified attacks against Zaporizhia, targeting civilian infrastructure with guided aerial bombs. What we have seen is the amount of FABs getting dropped into Zap has increased majorly. Like I've been saying, is Russia has this sort of like A, B, and C that they do. You drop FABs, you have TOS, and then you have FABs, glide bombs, TOS thermobarics, reconnaissance of guys on motorcycles, armoured assaults. So will we start seeing more of that around Kyiv? I think one of the first things will be if we do see, how far is Kyiv from the front line at the moment? 8 Ks. If we do see a push in here, potentially we'll see TOS in Kyiv. We will see what occurs. But let's look at what Suryak has said right about this in the same direction. The accumulation of Russian troops in Zap seems to indicate the Russian command may initiate a winter offensive in this oblast. Of course, it's going to be less snowed in down here than up in the north. So Russia may have more success in here than somewhere like Kursk. Kursk is a lot colder. In the event of such an offensive, there will be a series of advances along different axes of the front, advancing in the important cities of Kyiv and Huliopol. So Kyiv, Huliopol, I've got videos on my channel of interviewing and talking and being there during fighting on both of these if you go back through when I was in Ukraine in 2022. More than a great offensive, it is possible that there will be a gradual advances towards the two cities, but not beyond. The huge defence line built by the Ukrainian forces would prevent a significant advance. In addition, the Russian army would suffer significant attrition in its attempts to break through this line. Very similar to what happened to the Ukrainian army in the summer of 2023. Does that mean there'll be no offensive as such? Mapped with hypothetical areas of operation, so where Russia may push in. And this said, like I think he brings up a good point, could this have the same fate of the Ukrainian offensives in here that Kyiv Independent themselves say had no major breakthroughs? See where the Russian lines are? This is where Ukraine broke into Robotny but didn't go very far. Could Russia have the exact same fate if they try to push in here? Very potentially so. I believe that they'll try and push in this southeastern corner more, but the amassing of troops in here does mean that Ukraine will have to have some amass of troops sitting in here also. Kursk, as far away from here as you can get, there may be movement of troops between the two. Kursk has been the linchpin in war before. Maybe it will be again. So let's look over a couple of things around funding and elections. So the Finland's president, Alexander Stubb, said a call he had with Trump on Monday night made clear the president-elect needs to be taken seriously when he speaks about ending Russia's war in Ukraine. Yes, I would take the next president of the most powerful military in the world very seriously with what he says. We in Europe and the rest of the world need to understand that Donald Trump is very serious about getting a peace deal sooner rather than later. There is a window of opportunity for these negotiations between the election and inauguration day. So are there going to be phone calls? And there's also an opportunity there for Europe to supply more and try and bolster if there is a loss of the US support in here. But that's not enough time. Like I've said, Europe milked cheap Russian energy and cheap American military safety for too long, and their industrial industry internally, although increasing, can't backfill in that amount of time. But what I do say is there's 2 more months for Ukraine and Russia to be in their strongest possible positions if there is some peace deal signed. So we may see, like in those 1, 2, 3 of this is why attacks increase. There's about to be a breakthrough, about to be negotiations, or exhaustion. While they're not mutually exclusive, it can be a little bit of each if you sort of get finish line goggles on in this war. But I do ask the question, why would Russia settle with exactly what is happening as there is more ground being made exponentially, unless there is exhaustion? Keir Starmer urged Joe Biden to release funds of $20 billion loan to Ukraine before Donald Trump takes Office. Of course, this is with held up Russian funds. Mr. Starmer is expected to say Ukraine should finally be given permission to fire long-range Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia, something Mr. Biden has opposed. And I say, homeboy, you can give permission. They are your weapon systems. This is why this sort of whole idea of sovereignty, it's like, well, you can give permission. France, Macron, Keir Starmer, they can give permission for these further into Russia. But one thing I will say too is Russia sits out here, but this is all Ukrainian territory. And there's, of course, very valuable targets in here. And I'm not seeing Storm Shadow used for a long time. So that may give an idea of further production issues with these. I'm not seeing Storm Shadow being used, let alone in occupied territory where they can be used. The leaders started by discussing the situation in Ukraine, including how best to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going into winter. So how can we put Ukraine in the best possible position heading into winter? This is probably something that should have been asked 6 months ago. But what we do expect is to see large Russian attacks against critical infrastructure. Also, let's talk about one more thing with elections. This was from The Economist. Speaks about the talk in Ukraine is all about Trump and the waiting game. Will his new administration tilt Ukraine's way or Russia's? Again, the unpredictability of Trump could go one way or the other. Like I said, I believe under Harris, Ukraine was dying a slow death. We've seen many others talk about this too. Maybe Trump will go one way or the other. Can he impose a ceasefire? Will elections follow? For now, there are 2 dates on Kyiv's and Politico's lips. January 20th, 25, date of Trump's inauguration, the first moment for any possible ceasefire or lifting of military law, and May 25th, the earliest mooted date for an election. Now, one thing that Russian pages are quoting, they're quoting the Russian SVR, which is the International Intelligence Service, so like you think of like the CIA, and they are saying that Ukraine is preparing for 2025 elections, but I can't find any original quotes, but Russian pages are saying that. The presidential office denies that it is preparing for a vote, so the Ukrainian presidential office. Most sources remain skeptical that it will happen. How can it be splintered? A nation that will hold elections. The country is also yet to endure what many will assume is a difficult winter. Engaging in electioneering right now would be suicidal. So how would this affect, of course, Ukraine into winter too? But also with difficult winter, people may change their votes also. But I still believe it's incredibly important to introduce democracy into that system. Now, if you're talking about democracy, well, okay, under martial law, it becomes more authoritarian for military action reasons and a vertical rank structure to make decisions more quickly. But in long-term protracted war, I think the reintroduction of democracy into that system and what the people want is very important also once you get beyond years and years. Still, some groundwork appears to have begun. Regional election headquarters are mobilising. The work on candidate lists is beginning. The representatives of one likely presidential rival to Volodymyr Zelensky say that Ukraine needs elections, but they worry about making a public statement to this effect, fearing backlash from the presidential office. So if they start promoting themselves, what will the backlash be from then Ukraine's presidential office from Zelensky as well? If elections were held tomorrow, Zelensky would struggle to repeat the success of the landslide win he secured in 2019. And they talk about that how he would fare badly against a runoff with Valery Zaluzhny, who is incredibly popular in Ukraine and was sacked by Zelensky and made then the ambassador to Britain after falling out with Zelensky. He has not made political ambitions clear yet, though many are urging him to run, and I believe he would likely have a good chance at victory there. Remember, Zaluzhny made the suggestion before he was dispatched that Ukraine needs 500,000 guys at that point, well over a year ago, and he has proved to be overwhelmingly correct on that assumption. The president fares better when pitched against other opposing figures, some of whom are actively disliked, but a former colleague of the president says his best move might be to step aside regardless and keep his original promise only to serve one term, saying Zelensky has only one way to get out with an intact reputation. This source says that is to run elections without him and go down in history as the man who united a nation at war. That if he runs or continues, the alternative is risk being associated with a military collapse or an incomplete peace. So does he want to be the guy that signed the deal and it was incomplete peace, negotiation, whatever, or the one that pushed until there was a collapse? The deteriorating situation on the front line has already rippled through society, and this is Dmitry Pokrovsk, a military chaplain, says that it's the new soldiers he speaks to. There are lots of unmotivated men. They are fighting because that's the only way they stay alive. The army is censoring the most negative news to avoid fanning flames back home. A senior military official agrees. Even Mr. Zelensky is being shielded from the truth. It's not even that he's being kept in a warm bath, the source says, using a local idiom to suggest the president was being cocooned by his top officials. He's being kept in a sauna. So from that situation at the front too. As Trump's presidency looms, Ukraine braces for change. That is the one thing I am sure that they are sure that will happen, but that's where it could also be a positive. Trump is set to appoint 2 relative hawks to important foreign policy roles. Mark Rubio, a Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, a National Security Advisor. This could be very good for Ukraine, how these guys see other areas of the globe too. But they were disturbed when he announced that there would be no place for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. It seemed very sympathetic, a very negative development. But I can see what Russians are saying about Rubio and Waltz too, that it's not completely going to be a shambles either, although Pompeo may have been a better option when it comes to Ukraine itself. Trump's offer to Ukraine will come to resemble something close to the odds put forward by J.D. Vance, incoming VP. These would essentially rule out NATO membership while allowing Russia to keep 18% of Ukraine's territory that it currently occupies. But my question is with this, that is a freeze along the boards and that Ukraine won't join NATO. So I have a few questions in this. Why would Putin agree to that as he is advancing on the front line? So to stop that, Trump may need to make some threat or further action, so further funding to Ukraine or some threat of increase, whatever. I don't think allowing the policy shift of long-range strikes is going to swing Putin that much. So why would Putin agree to this? But on the flip side, why would Zelensky agree to not joining NATO? The survival of Ukraine, he has said, is in those security guarantees of NATO. So you have this problem of why would Putin come to the table if that's what's on offer as he's advancing? Why would Zelensky come to the table on the offer if there's no NATO membership? Because there's no hope, and Russia may launch another offensive there. And like I spoke about yesterday, that many politicians have staked political survival on NATO membership rather than exactly other territories or whatever. So getting Putin and Zelensky to the table on that, I think Putin will say that's not enough. And I think Zelensky will say that's too much. We can't move forward on that. So he could be stuck in this limbo for a large amount of time. For all the talk in Kyiv and other capitals about to enter the war, most of those who spend time on the front lines understand that a lot of fighting is still to be done. Putin holds the initiative, and it looks unlikely that he would offer a ceasefire until several battles are resolved. In Kursk, which we've shown you, Russian forces outnumbering Ukrainian forces by at least 6-1. Also, massive artillery advantage, and Ukrainian retreat seems inevitable soon. That's potentially why we saw that dam taken out. Ukraine's on the back foot in the Kursk region as it in turn occupies back into Russia. Where Russia is trying to push its soldiers out with the assistance of thousands of North Korean troops, there's no evidence of this. Fighting is also beginning in Zap province, what Ukrainian intelligence believes will be an assault on the provincial capital, an important industrial hub. You've got to work within reality. You can't tell war to stop and wait. So you need to deal with the reality, not maybe emotion in this. But I agree with what Suryak Map says about Russia attritionally tried to push to Zap. Could be a huge problem. But I also agree with what my friend said about the withdrawal out of Kursk could be a huge problem also. So again, we will see in this attritional war and what will happen and why at this point in time with the offer, if that is the offer, freeze territories here, why would Putin agree to that? Because he'd say we're moving exponentially in the front. But without NATO, Zelensky would say, well, our government staked survival on this. Without that, we're not going to survive long term without guarantees. So getting both to the table may be impossible. Could we see a withdrawal of funding, an increase of funding? I don't know. That's why I said the unpredictability from Trump is what I believe that Ukraine needs more so than the predictable nature of Harris's campaign, Biden's, that has allowed Ukraine to die a slow death so far and may continue that. Also, it seems like Biden-Harris campaign gave Ukraine enough, drip-feeded enough to cause large losses onto the Russians, but never enough to then have real victories on the battlefield in areas in depth also. So we'll see what Trump will do, but also the unpopularity of Trump amongst his own voters if he does then in turn really change back and go, we're going to fund Ukraine even further, and the destabilisation potentially there and the loss of faith in his government from his own supporters. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of months coming up. But Legends, I really need to get in the car and go. Well, I can't drive, but mother's driving me. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.